Now, what this means is that the Quran is not just there to be interpreted, it is there to be experienced. And very often in our superficial age we tend not to understand that. After all, there's no other book which you experience. Other books are just full of information, a medical textbook or a novel which tells a story or whatever it might be, but the Quran is not that. It has a content, it has words, it has meanings, it has messages, it has wisdoms, but it is not just that, and it is not even primarily that. Because the worship is entirely valid if you recite it correctly, even if you don't understand a word of it. And that must mean, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to make proper worship available only to people who happen to know Arabic, that the fullness of our experience of His speech can come about even if we don't have even a translation, let alone an interpretation. Now, this is something which is recurrently broached in the text itself. And linked to the principle of hikmah, of wisdom. What is wisdom? Well, you could say wisdom is, to use the traditional kalam definition, putting everything in its due place. A wise judge puts everything in due place. It's to do with ihkam, that is to say, doing things excellently and according to due measure. When we read the Quran, we recognize that that is an appropriate strategy for interpretation. But we also recognize that it is to do with seeing that the text is not exhausted by its outward horizon and that it has depths. And one of the experiences that believers most frequently have is, as it were, falling into the text. A moment of khushu', a moment of sudden opening, and there seems to be a crack in the page and we fall into the book. And many of the ulama have reflected on the subtleties of the book, like Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, for instance, have commented on this. And it is indeed what one would expect. After all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not make His final revelation simply a list of do's and don'ts. This is a non-Muslim perception of what the Quran is. It's just a kind of set of commandments. This is halal, this is haram, and follow these things and you'll get rewards in the next world. No, this is their stereotype, but the reality of the believer's experience is different. It's different because to the extent that we have some tiny inkling of the prophetic heart, which was the original Hamid, the original bearer of the Quran, we can experience and taste something of infinity. And this is our great experience of the transcendent, of the beyond. That the ulama say, none of you has faith until he finds in the Quran everything that he needs. And that doesn't just mean what the mind needs, it means what the heart needs as well. Many things that the heart has, particularly our emotional life, for instance, or our sense of beauty, our sense of morality, that the mind may not be able fully to encompass. So when we speak of wisdom in connection with Allah's book, and it does describe itself as the Hakim, Al-Quran al-Hakim, we are talking about a book that exists on many levels. So, inna lil-Qur'ani zahiran wa batinan wa haddan wa matla'a. Some of the ulama have written whole books. Dawud al-Qaysari, the first alim of the Ottoman Empire, the first mudarris of the madrasa at Iznik, wrote a whole book just on that particular athar. The Quran has an outward and an inward and a limit and a rising place. Mullah Finari also has a book just on that. And quite often when the ulama do a tafsir specifically on Surah Al-Fatiha, that's one of the things that they're looking at. So, but this of course imposes difficulties because human speech is finite, limited. We sometimes struggle to express ourselves even when we're talking about very worldly things. How could we express anything to do with the beyond, with the infinite, with the ghaib? Human speech cracks under the weight despite its extraordinary brilliance and versatility. It can't really carry those things. And the ulama generally, in our wise tradition, and ours is a way of sobriety and caution, not of extravagance, will say that the deeper things of deen are not to be put into words. Instead, we can speak in terms of ishara, pointings, indications, and there's a whole genre of hadiths. Hundreds of hadith works are called tafsir bil-ishara, tafsir by a kind of indication. Not ibara, which is the outward sense, the literal meaning, Fir'aun did this and Iblis did that, but the ishara, pointing. In other words, the text pointing into itself and away from the surface and inviting us into that extraordinary, mysterious world. It's important for us to remember this today, because there are plenty of our adversaries who think the Quran is just commandments or bits of doctrine or reports of ancient peoples. And this was the response of the Quraysh, the unbelievers, when they first scoffed at the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. They said it's just asatirul awwalin, fables of bygone folk. But the difference between the mu'min and the kafir is that the mu'min has something in his heart which is lit up, which is illuminated when he hears these verses. And this is one reason why, in my experience, the greatest door to Islam for non-Muslims is actually Allah's book. But when people come into Islam, Allah's book has invariably played a very significant role in this. But not so much, in every case, the formal meanings, although they are the most important thing that we need to learn, but the inward wisdom, the sonorities, the syncopations, the sounds, the way in which the resonances work. It is an extraordinarily sophisticated oral experience, and that again leads on to the greatest depths. So when we speak of Luqman,